In the summer of 1947, a 20-year-old hospital orderly named Harlan DeWitt Voss worked the overnight shift at the base hospital at Roswell Army Airfield, and on one of those nights, sometime in the second week of July, he was handed a basin of warm water, a bar of white soap, and a folded towel, and told to wash the hands of a patient in the last room on the east corridor. He did what he was told. He washed the patient's hands, and before he finished, the patient took one long finger, pressed it into the film of water on the steel instrument tray beside the bed, and drew a single shape. NN Voss watched the shape sit there for maybe 4 seconds before it ran together and was gone. He spent the next 42 years trying to draw it again. He never once believed he got it right. And I want to tell you what he wrote down, because the account exists. 41 pages in a black composition notebook, written in ballpoint in the fall of 1989, 2 months after a doctor in Lubbock told him what was growing in his pancreas. And I want to be straight with you before we go one step further. My instinct with a story like this is to walk away from it. That is my default setting, and it has served me well. I came to this notebook expecting to find the usual architecture of a hoax, and I read all 41 pages in one sitting, and the reason I couldn't stop is the reason we're here. It is not what Voss claims. It is what he admits he cannot do. He cannot draw the shape. The one thing the whole account exists to preserve is the one thing he tells you, over and over, that he has failed to preserve. A man building a lie does not build that into the center of it. NN somewhere in the next half hour, I'm going to show you the closest thing that survives to what the being drew, and I'm going to tell you why I think the shape itself may matter less than what happened to every copy of it. Hold on to that. Start with who he was, because he was nobody, and that matters. Harlan Voss grew up outside Portales, New Mexico, the third of 5 children, and he enlisted at 18 mostly, by his own written admission, to get out of a house with a violent father. By 1947, he was an orderly, the lowest rung of the hospital, the man who emptied pans and changed linens and mopped the corridor at 3 in the morning. The airfield he served was not an ordinary posting. Roswell Army Airfield was home to the 509th. The composite group stood up during the Second World War for a very particular kind of operational mission, which meant the base ran with a level of security and compartmentalization that a hospital orderly would feel every single day without ever being told why. Voss writes about that. He writes that there were doors on that base you learned not to look at. He was a man trained, thoroughly and early, in the discipline of not asking. N, which is what makes the night itself so strange in his telling, because nobody prepared him, no briefing, no oath, no officer taking him aside. His account says a nurse he did not recognize, a captain by her insignia, met him at the linen room around 1 in the morning and told him the East Corridor patient needed washing, and that he was to speak to no one about the patient's condition. He assumed burns. He writes that plainly. A crash on the range, a fuel fire, a man wrapped up past recognizing. That was the shape of his expectation walking down that corridor, and I ask you to keep his expectation in mind, because everything he describes next, he describes against it. NN the room had 2 military policemen outside it and 1 empty chair inside it. The overhead light was off. A gooseneck lamp on the supply cabinet was pointed at the wall, so the room sat in a kind of bounced half-light. And on the bed, on top of the sheets rather than under them, was the patient. Here is his description, and I'm going to give it to you almost exactly as he gives it, because the register of it is the first thing that stopped me. He does not write like a man describing a monster. He writes like a man filling out a chart. Small, he says, the size of a child of maybe 10, but proportioned wrong for a child, the head too large, the neck too thin to hold it, so that it lay tipped slightly to one side against the pillow. Skin without color, he writes, and then corrects himself in the next line. Not without color, the color of a cigarette ash that has kept its shape. No hair anywhere, no ears that stood out from the head, just a small opening on each side. 2 slits low on the face where a nose would sit. A mouth like a line drawn with a ruler, which he never saw open, not once in the roughly 40 minutes he was in that room. And the eyes closed the entire time, which he says he was grateful for, and which he also says he has thought about every day since, because it means he never saw them, and some part of him has spent 4 decades wondering what he was spared .nth in the hands, the reason he was there. Each hand had 4 fingers, long, narrowing toward the tips, no nails that he could find, and the skin of the hands was damaged, abraded, he writes, the way a man's hands look after he has crawled over caliche, ground in grit, fine as flour, in every crease, and a residue he could not name, tacky, faintly amber, that clouded the wash-water gray. His job, the whole of his job that night, was to clean those hands. And so, at 1 a.m, in the half-dark, a 20-year-old orderly from Portals took a hand that was not a human hand, held it in his own, and washed it with white soap. 1 finger at a time. N, he writes that the hand was warm. He writes that he did not expect that, and that the warmth undid him more than the look of it. And he writes one line in that section that I have gone back to more times than any other line in the notebook. It let me. That's the whole line. It let me. Not it was unconscious, not it was too weak to resist. It let me. Voss was certain, in a way he never manages to justify and never backs away from, that the patient was aware of him the entire time, eyes closed, mouth closed, permitting itself to be tended. He finished the left hand. He started the right. And partway through the right hand, the patient moved for the first and only time. The arm rose, he says, the way a branch moves under snow load, and the longest finger extended, and it reached to the steel instrument tray sitting on the cabinet beside the bed, where the basin had left a thin sheet of water across the metal. And in that sheet of water, in one continuous motion, without hurry and without hesitation, it drew a shape. One shape. He describes the drawing of it lasting perhaps 3 seconds. He describes the finger lifting away cleanly at the end, the arm settling back to the sheet, and the shape sitting there in the water under the lamplight, silver on silver. And here is where the account does the thing that fabricated accounts almost never do. It fails. Deliberately, explicitly, it fails. Voss spends nearly 6 full pages trying to tell you what the shape was, and he cannot. It was like a spiral, he writes, except that a spiral goes in, and this did not go in. It crossed itself twice near the middle in a way I have never been able to make my hand repeat. Every time he tries a comparison, he retracts it in the next sentence, like a brand, but not, like the whorl of a fingerprint, but not. And then he stops trying to describe what it looked like and writes something else entirely. And this is the passage I would put in front of anyone who thinks this notebook is a fabrication. He writes, "I have come to think I keep failing because I keep trying to draw a picture of a thing. It was not a picture of a thing. It was closer to a question. It did not show me something. It asked me something. And I did not know the answer. And I still don't. And I think about the fact that I couldn't answer it more than I think about anything else that has ever happened to me." That is where his language gives out. A plain-spoken man, 41 pages of flat declarative reporting, and at the exact center of it, the one moment his sentences stop working. I have read a lot of testimony in putting these episodes together. That collapse, that specific texture of a witness reaching for the event and coming back with an empty hand, is the hardest thing in the world to counterfeit. Liars finish their sentences. The water dried. 4 seconds, maybe 5. He stood there with the towel and watched the shape pull apart and vanish off the steel, and then the nurse captain was in the doorway telling him he was done, and he was walked back down the corridor, and that was the last time Harlan Voss ever saw the patient. 2 days later, by his account, the east corridor was an ordinary corridor again. The room held a supply overflow. Nobody said anything to him, then or ever. No oath, no threat, no visit. He was simply never spoken to about it at all, which he writes was its own kind of message, and I think he's right. Silence that total is not neglect. Silence that total is policy. Now. The part of me that doubts has been raising its hand for several minutes, so let's let it talk, because its objections are good ones. A story written 42 years after the fact, by a dying man about an event with no other witness he can name, concerning a base already buried under half a century of folklore. That is the profile of a tall tale. If the Notebook were all there was, I would tell you this is a sad, vivid piece of fiction by a man facing the end, and I would mean it. The Notebook is not all there is. And what else there is the reason this episode exists. Because Voss did not just write the account. For 42 years, before he ever wrote a word of narrative, he drew. Index cards, mostly. Also the backs of feed store receipts, the inside cover of a 1953 road atlas, the margin of a funeral program from 1971. When the Notebook surfaced, it surfaced inside a cigar box, and the cigar box held 117 drawings of the shape. Some in pencil, some in ink, a few pressed so hard the paper tore. And on the back of almost every one, in the same handwriting, a date and a word. The word is no. October 9th, 1952, no. March, 1960, no. Easter, 1977, no. 117 attempts across 4 decades, and by his own grading hand, not one success. The last card is dated 6 weeks before his death in February of 1994. It says, "Closer.nn, sit with that object for a second." Not the story, the object. 117 dated failures. Who does that? Who maintains a private, secret discipline of failure for 42 years over something they invented? Fabrication is a performance, and a performance needs an audience, and Voss showed these cards to no one. His own brother did not know the box existed. N, which brings us to the road the box traveled, and this is where the story stops being about one man's memory and becomes about the machinery of forgetting, because I have traced this box through every hand that held it, and every one of those hands is now still N. Voss died in February 1994 in Portales, unmarried, no children. The Notebook and the cigar box passed to his younger brother, Merle Voss, a diesel mechanic in Clovis, who by his widow's later recollection read the Notebook once, called it Harlan's Trouble, and put it on a closet shelf, where it stayed for 3 years. Merle died of a heart attack in August 1997 at 61. His widow, Adeline, kept the closet closed for 6 more years and then, in 2003, sold the contents of the house through an estate liquidator ahead of a move to her daughter's place in Amarillo. The box and the Notebook went out the door in a mixed lot of Army odds and ends, and the lot sold for $4. And the buyer was a man named Curtis Bell, a retired lineman from Roswell proper who collected airbase memorabilia, patches, orders, mess hall photographs. Bell understood what he had almost immediately, and here is where the pattern I have seen on this channel before shows up again, right on schedule. Bell told almost no one. He photographed every page and every card in 2011, printed the photographs, and put the originals in a gun safe. His daughter says he talked for years about writing to somebody about it, a university, a researcher, and never settled on who could be trusted. Curtis Bell died of a stroke in 2016 at 58, and it was his daughter, Renee, going through the safe in 2019, who finally scanned the Notebook, and it is her scans that eventually found their way to me. N and Zoe count the hands. Harlan Voss, dead at 66. Merle Voss, dead at 61. Curtis Bell, dead at 58. Every person who held the original account of that night is gone, and the account itself survived on a margin of $4 and one daughter's curiosity. I am not telling you those deaths are suspicious. Men die of heart attacks and strokes at those ages every day, and turning ordinary mortality into menace is exactly the kind of move I refuse to make. What I am telling you is quieter and, I think, worse. Nobody had to suppress this. Time nearly did it for free. The record of what may be the single most intimate human contact of the entire 1947 affair came within one estate sale of a landfill, and the question that keeps me up is not who tried to destroy it. It is how many boxes exactly like it were not bought for $4. NN because someone, at some point, did go looking for Harlan Voss. And this is the part of the record where the hole is .N9, the early 1990s. Before his death, Voss made 2 attempts to get his own service records. His notebook mentions the first request. His niece confirmed the second. What came back, both times, was a determination that his personnel file could not be located, with a reference to records lost in the 1973 fire at the Military Records Repository in St. Louis. A real fire that really did consume millions of Army files, and that has served for half a century as the all-purpose answer to a certain kind of question. Fine. Files burn. But Voss's account is checkable at the edges in a different way. He names his shift supervisor. He names 2 nurses from the day rotation. He names the mess sergeant. And when you go looking for the hospital's own administrative traces from that summer, through the secondhand paper trail that collectors like Curtis Bell spent decades assembling, the people around Voss appear where they should. Voss himself is a blank. A man is remembered by his sister's letters, is photographed at a Portal's wedding in his uniform in 1948, and casts no shadow at all in the paper of the base where he served. I have said something like this before on this channel, and I will keep saying it as long as it keeps being true. At a certain point, the gap stops being a gap. A record that is missing in exactly the right place is itself a kind of record.NN. Now let me show you the thing I promised you. Among the 117 cards, one is different. It is the only card that is not in Voss's hand alone. Dated 1988, it carries his usual attempt, the open spiral, the 2 crossings near the center, and underneath it, in a second, shakier handwriting, a note. That's near it. That's the nearest I ever saw. The note is signed with initials only. R.C. Voss's notebook never explains the card. It mentions, once, in a single sentence on page 33, that he was not the only one who tended the patient, that there had been a corpseman on the shift before his whom he never met and knew only by mention. He does not give a name, just the other one who washed it, so the shape was seen twice, drawn twice, graded by 2 separate witnesses as almost right. 2 men, apparently unknown to each other for 40 years, keeping the same failure alive on paper. And there is a 3rd trace, and I hesitated over whether to include it because I cannot tie it to either man, so take it with every grain of salt you have. In 2007, at an estate auction in Alamogordo, a wartime footlocker sold with the lot description noting a design scratched inside the lid. A photograph from that listing survives. It is crude, cut into paint with something like a nail. It is an open spiral, crossed twice near the center. The buyer has never been identified. The footlocker has never surfaced again. That is everything I know about it, and I have deliberately told you all of it, including the part where it proves nothing. But patterns are how this works. Not proof, patterns. One dying man's notebook is a story. 2 hands drawing the same failed shape is a coincidence if you need it to be. A 3rd instance, scratched in paint by someone we cannot name, in a place we would expect a baseman's belongings to end up, is where the back of my neck stops listening to the part of me that doubts. Once the shape starts repeating, you don't get to file it back under fiction. It has left one man's memory. It is out in the world, cut into steel and paint, and the world is where evidence lives. So here is where I have landed, and I hold it loosely. I don't know what lay on that bed on the East Corridor in July of 1947. I was not there. The man who was is 30 years dead, and everything I have walked you through tonight is testimony and paper, which is all this subject ever gives us, and which, I have argued before, is not nothing. Testimony and paper is most of what we call history. What I keep returning to is not the being. It is the gesture. Something that was dying, if Voss saw what he says he saw, spent its last recorded act of will, not on resistance and not on escape, but on communication. It waited until it was alone with the lowest-ranking man on the base, a boy nobody would ever debrief, holding its hand in warm water, and it wrote him a question on a surface it knew would erase itself in 4 seconds. It chose the water. I have turned that over for months. If you wanted a message to survive, you would not write it in water. Unless the message was never meant for the metal. Unless the only place it was ever meant to survive was the man. And it did survive in him. For 42 years, it was the organizing fact of a quiet life. It outlived his brother's patience and his own body, and it crossed into a cigar box, and it sat in the dark of a closet and a gun safe for a quarter-century of deaths and estate sales. And now it has crossed into you, and I notice that I have become one more hand in the sequence. And so, tonight, have you. What did it ask him? Why ask a question of a species that could not answer it? Was the shape drawn twice because two men needed to carry it, in case one of them broke? How many other cigar boxes went out of how many other closet doors for $4? And where are they tonight? Who requested Harlan Voss's file before he did? And why is the hole in the paper shaped so exactly like him? And the drawing marked closer. The last card of 117, dated 6 weeks before the end. Closer to what? Did he finally see it again, there at the finish, the way the dying are said to see things? Or did he die the way he lived, holding a question he could not answer, in a hand that had once been held? I don't know. I've stopped expecting to. But somewhere out there,